You're listening to XVGM Radio.
Here come the heroes to save the world from destruction. They are X-Men.
Welcome to XVGM Radio, where the bits keep coming. I'm Cable.
And I'm Wolverine.
And this is episode 93, X-Men, with special guest Carlos from the Heroes 3 podcast.
Carlos, you have to say who you are.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I am Psylocke.
Oh.
Good choice.
Hot.
Sexy.
Getting some diversity on the episode.
Yes.
We're getting spicy already. Thanks for having me, guys. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Let me loose, talk about X-Men. I'm very excited.
Can't go wrong.
Us
Can't
too.
go wrong with
Yeah.
this. Yeah, so we got this idea to do this episode for a number of reasons, but the primary one was like maybe, it must have been like 8 months ago. We were talking on the XVGM Discord, and Carlos was there. We were chatting it up, talking about X-Men. You know, I've always loved comics ever since, back in the day in the early 90s, which, we'll talk more about all of our history with X-Men. But we were talking about this, and Carlos chimed in and was like, yo, I love X-Men. And we were like, yo, we need to do an episode with you. So, yeah, thanks so much for joining us on this one. We're really excited to talk to you about all things X-related.
I'm honored. Yeah, back in the day, X-Men was like the entry drug for comic books for me.
Yeah.
And it came at the right time. It was the early 90s, so the X-Men were popping really, really, really big. So that got me into comic books. It got me drawing a lot. And it kind of was like, not to be dramatic about it, but kind of a life path because, I love all of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah.
I don't really do visual art, but similarly, the X-Men were an entry point to a lot of different things for me. If it weren't for the X-Men cartoon show, I don't know that I would have ever really gotten into comics. I didn't actually get into comics until a bit later in life, but it was, as a kid, I really only liked cartoons that were more or less comedic.
Right.
But the X-Men was actually something that I enjoyed watching. That there was a little bit of comedy, but it wasn't about the comedy.
Right.
It was one of the few action cartoons that I enjoyed, and because of that, I think that's what made me also enjoy Batman in the Animated Series.
Sure.
And kind of fed my love of that kind of stuff later in life. But like as a young kid, it was like Heathcliff, Garfield, like it was really just like the silly, funny cartoons.
Right.
And I really could have been a one note guy for a while.
Could have been a one-note Justin.
Yep.
So, Carlos, tell us a little bit about your podcast that you do, just so we can get it out there and let people know where they can check you out.
It's funny, in a lot of ways, I always thought I would end up doing something video game music related. But the co-hosts that I do Heroes 3 with, Heroes 3 is all about Asian cinema. So I think our bread and butter is Kung Fu films, but we've covered a lot of different stuff, and we have the umbrella of Asian cinema so that we can cover a lot of different things. It's the cliche term, like we take a deep dive or we dig into like films, but honestly it is a lot of that, where we take a film that we like or maybe something we haven't seen and really get into it and talk about the behind the scenes of the films and talk about the plot of the movie. And I've learned a ton of stuff about these things that I already really loved, so I'm hugely appreciative of that. So yeah, if it sounds like something you might be interested in, check us out. Heroes 3, we're all over the place. And just recently we've been wrapping up a look at the works of Bruce Lee, so that's a huge name in Asian cinema, in general. I've come to a really greater appreciation of him, and I already liked him. If you had a question about Bruce Lee, we probably answered it. So yeah, if you're interested, check us out.
That actually answers a question that I was going to ask you, which was going to be, do you tend more towards things that are in the mainstream or things that never made it to the mainstream? But it sounds like you do a lot all over the place.
But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of Heroes 3. So if you like anime, if you like Kung Fu cinema, samurai, chambara, we've even done a couple of Bollywood films.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that falls under the Asian banner. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, all of this stuff. It's a really good time.
Awesome.
Very cool.
So before we dive into what we played, which should be a no-brainer for you X-Men game fans out there, we do have some top-of-the-show stuff that we need to talk about. First off, we wanted to officially announce that episode 100 is kind of, sort of, semi around the corner. At this time, it'll be in April of 2023. And because we're still releasing monthly, so at this point in time, it's planned for April. But we wanted to start the ball off with the fact that it's going to be a listener request episode. Literally anybody who listens to the show, you don't have to be a Patreon member, send us an email, xvgmradio@gmail.com. Send us one song that you'd like us to play, and as long as we haven't played it on the show before, we will put it in the show. If you feel like you would like to do an audio testimonial, great. We'd love to put that in the show. You can send us that too. If you just want to do a quick write-up, like, this is why I chose this track, and that's it. So it's going to be like 11 picks, right? It's an intro and then 10 picks.
Yes. Yep.
So plenty of options and chances for you to hear your song. We're going to start collecting these so that we can play them. So it's going to be just like episode 50 was. So if you listen to episode 50, that's the format that we plan on doing. Right.
If it's already been played, we'll let you know via email. We'll ask you to pick something else. It doesn't disqualify you.
No, not at all.
If we get more than 11 tracks, we will have to roll dice. So we'll do it live, so everybody has an equal chance on air, quote unquote, to get their track played. But if it does not get played, we will find another way to get it on at a future point, because the next listener pick would be episode 150. Right. So it'll be a little while.
Also,
I think that's cool. It's like a survival mode.
Yeah. Also, we are announcing a title card contest. So normally we do our own thumbnails. We did actually have Carlos do art for us once. I think it was like episode 59, something like that. Yeah. But now it's your turn. Any artists out there that are interested in joining this contest, we are going to let you design our title card for episode 100. What that means is, if you look at all the rest of our title cards, you can see where we kind of sit. Sometimes we'll have a cute girl on there. Sometimes we'll have like some guns or whatever. That's fine, but nothing like super extreme. Other than that, it has to be able to be resized to 1280 by 720, so it could fit for YouTube's thumbnail. So it can be bigger, but it needs to be appropriately able to be resized so that it doesn't look stretched out or weird. So, but if you get chosen for your art, you get $200. We are giving you $200 to design our title card for episode 100. So,
That's so fun.
Yeah. So
Cash prizes, people.
cash prizes. You will be
That's really
sent
cool, guys.
that money. So get your pencils going. You could send your entries to xvgmradio@gmail.com.
Please put episode 100 title card in the
Yes.
in the subject,
Yes.
so that we know that's what's going on.
Yep.
We're gonna have them automatically sorted. It'll be a lot easy for us to find and go through them. If you don't put that in there, we'll still try to find it. But if it does get lost because you didn't put that in your subject, we're sorry.
And on top of that, if you submit an entry and it does not get picked, fear not, because we will be featuring it in the video version of the episode 100. So
The
we
YouTube
will,
version.
yeah, the YouTube version. So it'll be on the YouTube video. You can see your art featured on there as kind of like a runner-up sort of thing. No money involved in that, but it is something where we want to showcase your art. If you took the time to do it, we don't want you to feel like, it wasn't worth it. So
Right.
yeah. So that's it. That's all the top of the show stuff we got. For that, I would say the deadline would need to be like March. March 1st.
Or early March.
Yeah, we're giving you like months and months and months. So try to get that title card in there. It also has to have a spot for our logo. So nothing too insanely busy. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this track that we came in on. Carlos picked our intro, and that was from the X-Men arcade game, which came out in 1992. That track was called Here Comes the Hero. And who composed that one, Carlos?
So the information that I have is from the Konami sound team. So we've got Seiichi Fukami, Yuji Takenouchi, Junya Nakano, and Ayako Nishigaki. I really tried to dig a little deeper, but there was actually no official soundtrack release for this. And I'm surprised, actually, because, all this Konami stuff from around this time was so good. And I think this sits with like something like a Violent Storm or something like that, I'm sure there's got
Metamorphic Force.
Yeah, bootleg vinyl of it somewhere, but even that would
That'd be amazing.
information. It's a banger, and if you loved the X-Men and you were alive in the 90s and you went to a mall or anywhere, you probably put some quarters into this machine.
Oh yeah. One of the first times that I really felt like it was a very memorable thing for that was I remember playing it in Chuck E. Cheese, and I remember just playing it constantly. There's this other place called Scooters, which was like my primary arcade joint. I loved Scooters. It was in Bristol, Connecticut, and it was just this massive arcade place. They also had mini golf and laser tag and all that sort of stuff. Used to play it constantly, and I remember being older, and I was hanging out with a bunch of friends, and we were all like, man, I really want to play the X-Men arcade game. And we all kind of felt like we were in our early 20s. We're like, yeah, let's do it. So we went down to Chuck E. Cheese, which was still open at the time and still had the X-Men arcade game.
Oh, wow.
So we just went, and it's you see these giant adults just huddled around this X-Men arcade, the 6-player X-Men arcade game, just having a blast. It was awesome.
This is the one with 2 screens, right? It's a double
That's
wide?
the 6-player, yeah. It's
yeah.
got 2 screens, 6 players. It's massive. It's a huge cabinet. I always dreamed of owning that cabinet.
Oh wow! I've heard horror stories about the maintenance for those.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, that
Oh.
what is it? Ninja Warriors? That 3
That one had
screen?
3, yeah.
Those have got to be insane.
Oh, yeah.
You'd have a 4-player cab, but then there's also that deluxe cab. And the thing I thought was hilarious was that on the 4-player one, you could pick your character when you put your quarters in.
Right.
But on the 6-player, each spot was a character.
Right,
So
right.
if you wanted to play as Colossus, it was 3rd from the left or something.
That's the one.
So it's really crazy.
Yeah.
I love the sounds on it. There's the classic Colossus. Oh!
Yeah.
Everybody loves that.
That everybody hears at MagFest when they go.
Magfest roar.
Yep.
But the synths on this track are soft. They're a lot of synths, especially from the FM synths, tend to be really sharp, a little bit piercing. They're good to listen to, but there's just a different quality about them. And this, I was noticing that they're softer and a lot more pleasing to me.
It depends. Some of the synths are definitely soft, the ones that are more kind of wispy sounding, I agree with you there. But then there's these really harsh kind of ones, like dear meow. There's a lot of like note bendy kind of, almost like
really,
a like 70s 70s horror movie. I get like a goblin vibe from a lot of those note bends. You know,
dude, yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah, there's some really like squishy, like stretched out, like real, like, crazy sounding, especially like I think boss tracks.
Yeah, like when the boss shows up, they got that. Yeah. I always used to jaw Blob in the face right when he appeared, because he'd be like, nothing, stop and then I just like deck him in the face so he shuts up. Or Pyro. Pyro will, and then you just punch him in the face. Yeah.
The thing that I think people kind of forget about is that all of the character designs in this were based on Pride of the X-Men, which was like a pilot, like single episode that never really panned out into a series, and then they redeveloped it. And I mean, honestly, the more iconic of the '90s team of the X-Men,
for sure,
was represented in the
Jim Lee era. Yeah.
But I love Pride of the X-Men, and I mean, I love what the X-Men became in the 90s, but I wish I could live in an alternate reality where that Pride of the X-Men like became a series, because it looks beautiful. And I mean, it's a pilot, so there's a lot more money in the animation, but it really stands up there with like stuff like Fist of the North Star, because it was like Japanese animation that handled it, and it just looks beautiful. But
I get a lot of G.I. Joe vibes from it, especially with some of the sound effects that they use, like the pew, 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 like the lasers and stuff. A lot of that carried into Pride of the X-Men. While I have a soft spot in my heart for Pride of the X-Men, especially knowing that it's tied into this game, at the same time, like, I hate the fact that like they butchered some of the voices. Like Wolverine is you know what I mean?
Yeah, he has like almost like an Australian accent to me. And
which is funny.
Actually, he appeared in like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Yeah.
And in that appearance, he had like an Australian accent, and I think they
weird.
like used that as a touchstone to carry that over to Pride of the X-Men, which is so strange.
Yeah. I'm glad that when they cast for the regular X-Men cartoon, they got Cal Dodd as Wolverine, because you know he's actually Canadian. Like a lot of the cast was from Canada, so it worked out.
Love that cast.
Yeah, we've played X-Men arcade music before, so I'm just going to name one game from each composer just so we can move on. Seiichi Fukami, Vulcan Vulture. They did that in 1988. Yuji Takanouchi did Project X Zone 2 in 2016. We've definitely talked about them before. Junya Nakano did Lethal Skies Elite Pilot Team SW in 2001. And Ayako Nishigaki did Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters in 93. I'm not sure which version of the game that was, probably the Super NES and Genesis version, but they were credited for sound design. That's it. We're going to go round robin as we usually do, starting off with Carlos and then following it up with Justin and then myself. So Carlos, what's your first pick?
So my first pick today is the Wolverine stage theme from Marvel Superheroes. Yuki Iwai is the composer for that. There's a selection of the Capcom pool that was composing for everything at the time. Yuki Iwai is listed in the soundtrack as composing this theme.
Very cool. All right, well, let's get into Wolverine stage.
Okay, you were listening to this track from Marvel Superheroes. This is Wolverine Stage. This game came out in the arcade in 1995 from Capcom, and the composers listed are Takayuki Iwai, Yuki Iwai, Tatsuro Suzuki, and as far as I know, I believe that Yuki Iwai composed this track.
That 100% makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Cadillacs and Dinosaurs much?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Especially that guitar lick.
I was gonna say, like,
So good.
the guitars on this are awesome, and it reminded me of a lot of the really cool Capcom arcade stuff.
Yep.
I mean, I wasn't thinking of Cadillacs versus Dinosaurs, but as soon as you said it, I was like, oh yeah, I got it.
Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Mega Man X2 really kind of screams that Capcom sound that, honestly, it's like you love it or hate it. We've definitely talked to people in the Discord who are like, I hate that sound. I hate that tone. And then, we talk to people who are right, who are like, I love that tone. It's so good.
And for me, actually, it wasn't until like the recent years that I've heard people kind of pushing back against the Mega Man X guitars.
Yeah.
I always thought they were so cool.
Right?
I feel like it's more often than not younger people who are not down with that sound, and it's probably because they didn't grow up with it. And I objectively I can hear it's a little bit grating, but at the same time, like, I grew up with it, and it's partly nostalgic, but also partly like it was like the sound, almost like the sound of an era. Like,
I mean, I think that the people that grew up playing the Super NES and playing a lot of Mega Man love that tone, but not necessarily the people that weren't like Mega Man X fans.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's definitely, like, I know we've talked to people in our Discord who are not fans of the tone, who are our age or older. So I don't necessarily know if
I'm not saying it's only an age thing, but I feel like the majority of people that don't like it are probably people that are a little bit younger that didn't grow up with it.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Yeah. I never really thought about it like that.
Yeah, I would imagine, like you said, there's plenty of people in our age group that have a similar problem, but I like you said, I assume that it's because they just weren't into those games or whatever.
I think like a lot of people preferred like the meteor tone of the FM too.
For me, the takeaways that I have with this track, you guys were talking about the guitars, but I think like the melody has like these long notes of guitar that kind of, to me, it kind of actually like rings towards like Wolverine as a character, kind of like this more emotional, melodic,
somber.
Somber. Also, like, we kind of joked about it while we were listening, but towards the second half of the track, you kind of get these like kind of tribal like bongos or something.
really subtle in the background.
Yep. And I kind of think that kind of leans towards his like kind of feral nature. And I almost feel, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I feel like the composer really kind of understood what they were going for when it comes to Wolverine as a character. And the stage is actually like a Canada stage where you're like fighting on like a wooden bridge. It's like snow covered. And I believe after the first stage, the bridge breaks and you're in a river, like a roaring rapids.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really cool stage. The joke I made though was those bongos. I said, yeah, that's when Wolverine gets on Yoshi.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
That's so good.
And they are subtle too, because like during the break when we were listening, Mike asked me like, hey, can you rewind it like 20 seconds? I just want to hear something. I didn't really hear them until like he was like, okay, yeah, no, did you hear those bongos? And I was like, oh yeah, no, I do hear. And then like your joke was like perfect.
Yeah, perfectly timed.
Thanks. Yep. For me, I love the X-Men, but I also love fighting games, and I had this really like kind of beautiful kismet moment when I was a kid where I went to the arcade and I literally saw like a crowd of people around a machine, and I had no idea what it was, but as I got closer, I understood that it was an X-Men game, and I was like, whoa, what is this? And then when I got even closer, I saw that it was a X-Men game by the people that made Street Fighter.
Right.
And I literally melted into the floor.
It was like chocolate and peanut butter, right?
Oh,
yeah. And that was X-Men Children of the Atom. And Marvel Superheroes is basically like the kind of follow-up to that game.
Right.
And the thing that I like to say about that is that this game, story-wise, even though fighting games don't have much of a story usually, it's more of a premise to get them all together, is the Infinity Gauntlet, which now I think everybody knows the Infinity War,
For
like
sure.
in the gems, like because like Marvel movies are like the Star Wars for this generation. So it's kind of crazy to me that me as a kid loving Infinity Gauntlet and the X-Men, getting to play this game and really enjoying it now as an adult, this is like the biggest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Which is so boggling to me. People know who Thanos is that casually mention Thanos. It's
Right.
so weird.
Yeah, like I remember like really being into comics like around like 2008, 2007, around that time, and nobody knew who Thanos was. And I remember like loving playing as Thanos in Marvel vs. Capcom 2.
Yeah.
What's interesting about the X-Men Capcom love is that all started with the Punisher. Their very first game that Capcom did with Marvel was the Punisher beat 'em up.
Yeah,
We could play as
with
Punisher and Nick Fury. Right.
Yep.
They loved X-Men so much. Like the team sought out. I remember reading this. The team
there's a
sought
really good
it out.
oral history about it.
And they sought out Marvel and were like, hey, we'd love to continue working with you on this. So they were like, yeah, you can make an X-Men game. Cool.
Yeah.
You know, why not? So that's kind of how this whole Marvel versus Capcom thing kind of got started.
I was actually just going to say, like, I feel like without X-Men Children of the Atom and Marvel Superheroes, we wouldn't have Marvel's Capcom 1, 2, 3, which are games that I love. Like, I remember playing Marvel Superheroes as a kid in the arcades, and it was cool. It was a lot of fun, but I never really understood the concept of how to like use the gems that you got, because they were they called because they weren't called Infinity Stones. They were Infinity gems. Exactly.
Yeah.
And like I occasionally I'd get them and I'm like, how do I actually do anything with this? Because like the cabinet that I played on, it wasn't in like a major arcade. I think it was in like a store or something, and didn't have information around the edge around like how to do combos or how to do things. So it was just like, I got a gem. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Real quick, so we mentioned Yuki Iwai is the composer for this track. I mean, we already mentioned Cadillac vs. Dinosaurs, so real quick. Gargoyle's Quest in 1992, they were sound composer. Music design on Street Fighter II Turbo, Mega Man X, Final Fight 2, Disney's Aladdin, like all like the sound that you hear here, if you hear it anywhere else, it's Yuki Iwai.
Right. Yeah, their final game was R-Type Final 2 in 2021. So they are still in the game. They took a break between 2009 and 2021. So
Yeah. But all right, so let's move into my pick here.
Yeah, what do you got for us?
Yeah, so this is going to be just X-Men. This came out in the Genesis in 1993. We're going to hear the final boss track, and this is composed by Fletcher Beasley. Welcome back. That was Final Boss from 1993's X-Men game on the Genesis. It was composed by Fletcher Beasley. So this one, I mean, I've got
Pam's husband.
Yeah, Pam, definitely Pam's husband, not Jim.
No,
Pam's first husband.
Yes,
Fletcher Beasley, definitely from the UK.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
But this one, this is funny because this is, I think, an example of a track that a few years ago I would have been like, yo, get this out of my face. But I have a slightly better appreciation for the Genesis, and I will say, despite the twarmpy fartiness of some of the stuff, I thought the melody line, like the main kind of like bass melody, was awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like the higher pitched stuff, I don't know, I will call it like woodwinds or violins or something. I feel like they kind of got in the way a little bit, but all things considered, I really enjoyed this track for what Fletcher was doing with the bass and what he was trying to do with the drums.
This is very funky.
Yeah,
it's a very funk-derived track, and it could perfectly fit on like Toe Jam and Earl. It's got that same tone and vibe to it.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
If you told me John Baker composed this, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know how this fits. I don't know how this fits with X-Men necessarily, but I'll roll with it.
I could totally see it like a nerdcore rapper just dropping bars.
Oh yeah.
That'd be.
You're gonna get
cool.
Mega Ran on that.
I would love that.
Yeah,
that'd be cool.
That'd be
I have some X-Men Genesis memories. I didn't have a Genesis when I was a kid.
Same.
But my cousin did, and he had this game because he was into the X-Men too at the same time. So I had a lot of memories going over and playing this game, and it was cool to me because it was one of those games where it was like a platformer, but they just basically throw you in a big room and you kind of have to find the exit. But I think you could play as Nightcrawler, Gambit. You could play as Gambit, which was a big draw back then, because like it was like, oh, Gambit, cool. So I did have a good time with it in that sense, where I didn't have to understand what was bad about it. You know what I mean? I mean, even a rental, you might play it for a while and you're like, oh man, like this game actually isn't that great. But when you go over by like your cousins and there's other stuff going on and it's like, oh, can I play it for like 15 minutes? Then it's like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. I mean, so you mentioned Nightcrawler and Gambit. There's 4 playable characters in total. So the other 2 were Wolverine, of course, and Cyclops.
Yeah, and Jean Grey would like pull you out of pits.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Oh, yeah, nice. I remember that too.
Which happened a lot. I did not like this game. I remember playing it on one of those like Switch stations for the Genesis that they had in like toy stores, like Toys R Us. So like you'd hit the button and it would cycle through different games, carts that were plugged into the demo unit. And I remember playing this one and just really not liking it. And then I remember picking it up, thinking like, maybe, now that I own a Genesis, maybe it's okay. And like, I just can't get into it.
Well, to be fair, the game itself is fairly difficult.
It's really hard,
In 2011, IGM named this in one of its 15 really, really, really hard games list, citing unfairly placed enemies, ridiculously annoying jumps, and near impossible to beat bosses.
Yeah, the jumps are insane on this game. One really cool thing about this, though, is that there's a part in the game where you get to Mojo, and you have to hit reset on your Genesis in order to bypass Mojo.
Yep.
I remember people talking, not back when the game was out, but years later, people were talking about that, and I was like, that is insane. Nothing else does that.
Very unique, very different. What about Fletcher Beasley? Let's talk about him.
So Fletcher Beasley started out with this game in 1993 doing sound and music on X-Men, so he also did some of the sound effects. Then went on to do Poker Face Paul's Blackjack in 1993, music and sound effects on that. Let's see, World Series Baseball in 1994, Spider-Man in 1994, he did music and sound effects again. That's that's the SNES game.
Yeah, that's the one based on the cartoon.
Right. Not Maximum Carnage.
Right, not that one, no. The one actually based on the animated series, I believe.
Right. In 1996, he did music in Barbie Fashion Designer. And then 1997, Into the Void. And his last game is as a sound designer for Ultimate Spider-Man in 2005.
Right. He went back to Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, my first pick is going back to the Capcom stuff. This is from X-Men Mutant Apocalypse on the Super NES. This came out in 1994. This is Theme of Cyclops is one of my favorite Super NES songs. And this was by Setsuo Yamamoto.
You're listening to XVGM Radio.
Welcome back to our X-Men episode with Carlos from the Heroes 3 podcast. This was X-Men Mutant Apocalypse that you just heard, the 1994 Super NES game. This track was Theme of Cyclops by Setsuo Yamamoto. Setsuo Yamamoto, of course, also the Mega Man X composer, really drawing out those Mega Man X vibes with this track. Yeah. Man, I love this song. This is one of my favorite songs, as I said earlier, on the Super NES. I used to play this on an emulator before I actually owned the cart, and I would turn off the sound channels and start them all back up and make my own live remixes where I would just have the guitars come in, and then I would slowly bring in the bass, slowly bring in the drums. I'd do my own little cool remixes right there while the track was playing. So
it's a cool way to do it.
Yeah, I'm a total VGM nerd. But man, I love this song. You want to talk about Mike the song? I mean, it's got galloping bass. It's a very clearly Iron Maiden kind of inspired NWOBHM heavy metal dual wielding guitars where one octave is higher. The guitar line comes in and then you got the second guitar that kind of follows, and that right there is if you could bottle a sound and pour it down my gullet, that would be the sound. Right there.
Oh, dude, harmonized guitars are where it's at.
Yeah, for sure.
If only the track was called Theme of Wolverine, it would be
Wolverine's track is really good too.
No. I'm not talking about the Wolverine's track.
Talking about
right.
If this track was called Theme of Wolverine, it would be 100%.
Yeah,
Mike in a
for sure.
VGM.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Wolverine's track on this game is also really good, but Carlos already stole the spotlight and picked a Wolverine track. So
you know what's funny though? Yeah, and I'm realizing that I kind of goofed because you know what? Cyclops is my dude. Everybody hates the Cyclops, and he's a big old square, and I get it.
Yeah.
I love Slim. I love Scott Summers. He's my favorite dude. I remember. Yeah, you're the Wolverine guy, so we should have flipped this.
Yeah. I'm the one coming off the Blackbird punching you in the stomach.
Yeah, that's right. I'm all crying and sad.
Right. Gene, boo-hoo.
Oh, man.
I'm going to go eat some turkey.
I mean, it's funny. A lot of people do look at Cyclops as a square and kind of like a Boy Scout, but he's kind of not. I mean, maybe this is more of a recent development, but so the other joke is Cyclops is a dick. That's just it. In the live action movies, I felt like he was borderline between a square and a dick.
Yeah.
But in some of the more recent comics, he is a maniac.
They've really changed his character over the years. He actually,
I think he's broken is the problem. He's just he broke at some point, and now he's kind of not crazy. But
he runs the gamut of problems that kids have gone through. I mean, he's got major daddy issues. The fact that his parents weren't around. He lost his parents at a very early age. Of course, they turned out that they were what's his name? Corsair.
Starjammers.
Yeah, Starjammers and that whole thing. He's got a brother. Alex Summers and that whole thing. But to me, Cyclops is always kind of centered around Jean, and when Jean is gone, where does Cyclops kind of evolve? And I think that's where the character really shines through, is when he doesn't. Yeah, right. Or Psylocke. There was that time in the 90s where she was.
But mostly when Jean Grey's not around,
it's Emma Frost.
He's with Emma Frost.
Oof. True. Yeah, that whole.
I mean, for me though, the thing that I always thought was cool was that back in the day, he was the leader. He was also a master strategist.
Yes.
And I really don't really bring that up, but yeah, nowadays he's basically turned into Magneto and's gone beyond. He's worse than Magneto in a lot of ways. I think there's something to be said about the cool, collected leader Cyclops.
Yeah.
I would love to see some more of that. But the other thing too is that Wolverine is such a huge character, and everybody loves that kind of anti-hero, and he's got all of this complexity, and he's cool. He has claws. So having Cyclops, and Wolverine play off each other is really important. But unfortunately, I feel like the easy thing to do is make Wolverine the cool one and Cyclops the not cool one.
Yeah. This game is great. It is an awesome action platformer. type game, mostly action, less platformer, I'd say. But there are some like jumping elements and moments throughout the game, kind of littered throughout. You can play as Psylocke, Wolverine, Cyclops, Beast, and Gambit. I don't think I'm missing anybody.
No, that's everyone.
That's everybody, yeah.
You're right.
The way it works is when you first start off in the game, you pick between those characters and they have levels designed for them. When you beat each level, like if you complete all 5 characters, it opens up new levels and you could play with any character. You can play any of the stages, but all the stages are like kind of made for certain aspects of certain characters. So like, you can climb the walls with Wolverine, in certain parts to access like certain hidden items and whatnot. So it's a fun game. I've reviewed it on my channel. Go check it out. I even had Cal Dodd be in the video.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah. So go watch that if you're a big X-Men animated series fan. So, and we already talked about Setsuo, so we can move on to back to Carlos.
Oh, okay, cool. Before we move on, and I'll keep this short, I promise.
Sure.
This was like at the top of my Christmas list in 1994. So like
That's cool.
12-year-old Carlos, and I had that, and I had Final Fantasy 3, and I was like, man,
That's a tough choice.
Yeah, and the insanity is that I must have been really good this year. I got them both. I got Mutant Apocalypse and Final Fantasy 3.
Wow, that's awesome. I don't know if I could pick between those two. I think I go with X-Men.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I would go Final Fantasy, but that's that neither here nor there.
That checks out for both of us.
Yeah, exactly. And they're both fantastic games. For
sure.
It's like it wins by a thin margin, I think, for both of us.
Yeah.
So at the time, we mentioned X-Men Children of the Atom, the Capcom arcade game. That couldn't really be ported to like a 16-bit system. So what they chose to do is basically kind of make a different version, like a beat-em-up style game, action game. But the thing that I thought was really cool about Mutant Apocalypse was that in order to do the special moves, all like the mutant abilities, those are actually like Street Fighter motion.
Right.
So
Oh,
yeah,
wanted to shoot,
forward
Cyclops'
attack and
optic blast. It was like a quarter circle forward and stuff like that. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that is a cool aspect.
My next track. We're going from one of my favorite X-Men things ever to one of my least favorite X-Men things ever. So this is from the Uncanny X-Men, which came out on the NES in 1989. And actually, I looked really hard, but I couldn't find a composer for this. And I believe this is an LJN game, so that should make you shudder a little bit when I say that. Those games are also like kind of handled by random like sleeper companies, and it's hard to find info on it. But this is going to be a level 3, Search and Destroy the Robo Factory from the Uncanny X-Men on the NES.
Nice. Okay,
you were listening to Level 3, Search and Destroy the Robo Factory from the Uncanny X-Men on the NES from 1989. And boy, oh boy, this is a stinker, guys. But revisiting it for this episode, I feel like the music is pretty cool. We tried to look up a composer, but I mean, we're at an unknown point.
Yeah, I mean, like on the Wikipedia page, it says it's either Bothtech or Pixel. Pixel seemed to be more in line with who I found who developed it, and that company was founded by Junichi Sato, who is a composer who worked on games like Predator in 1988, Thunderbirds, Knight Rider Special, Die Hard in 1991, Mr. Do in 95. So I don't necessarily know if that's the composer, but my guess is that that's who composed for it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So what I can say about this game is that I didn't get it when it came out, but
that's good.
1991, maybe around 91, 92, when I was really getting into the X-Men. I saw it at like a rummage sale. So I was like, whoa, an X-Men game on the Nintendo. I want to try it out. And it was the most disappointed I've ever been with a video game purchase. You're basically playing through these kind of almost abstract looking top-down stages. And you can pick between 4 characters, I believe: Cyclops, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, and Storm.
And Iceman.
Okay, sure. And but they all basically, like, it doesn't really, you don't really get anything out of changing your characters because they're all pretty much the same.
Yeah.
The one thing I also remember is that you'd always have like a computer controlled player with you, and that was just a really bad idea because, I mean, like any video game back then, if there was a computer controlled character, they're just doing the wrong thing always. I probably got past like maybe the 2nd or 3rd stage, but I've never completed it, and I really don't feel like I need to.
No.
You kind of understand what you're getting, but regardless, I do appreciate the track, and actually kind of some jazzy choices with the composition that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, no, I agree. The track was really catchy, and I mean, it's a short loop, but for such a poor game, the music at least redeemed it a little bit.
This is a pretty unique pick. It does definitely have like some like kind of big band / jazz vibes, but I also get like a dance vibe too. A lot of like the plinky kind of punk, 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 kind of sounds that really kind of stood out to me. But like the rest of the song is, I don't know. It's not the best pick, but I like the fact that you picked this one though, because it covers the horrendous era of NES X-Men games that just, man, I think Wolverine is a little better than this one, but man, like, all these Marvel games for the NES were terrible. They were all really bad.
I learned as a kid pretty quickly was that usually licensed games are bad.
with some exceptions. Yeah.
So I would also say that because I learned that, I missed out on some cool licensed games
for sure
too. Like when I was a kid, I was like, if I saw like US Gold or Electronic Arts on something, I'm like, nope, I'm not renting that from Blockbuster.
No, not at all. I mean, I did like some LJN games, like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. Those were a lot of fun. I think it's really kind of hit or miss, and mostly miss when it comes to LJN. So
agreed on the whole licensed games aren't a great thing. The exception, to me as a kid, the exception almost always being arcade games, like licensed arcade games, because I didn't understand at the time, but I think I had a little bit of a concept of like there was more money that went into an arcade game, and also they want to make them good so that they get your quarters.
Oh, for sure,
and keep getting your money.
There's no comparison. This came out in what, like 89?
Yeah.
89.
Okay. Like 3 years later was X-Men 2, the arcade game. So there's just like no comparison.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. I got to ask, since we don't have a composer to talk about, your 5 favorite X-Men, not villains, just heroes.
Just members of the X-Men.
Members of the X-Men. Mm-hmm.
Well, I buried the lead because I told you how much I love Cyclops.
Yeah.
I am a giant size X-Men, like that team fan. So when I was a kid, I did some soul searching, and I told you guys that Uncanny X-Men 280 was like the first issue that I got. But what happened was that my mom actually got me like a pack of a bunch of random comics. So in that same pack, along with 280, was a bunch of issues of X-Men Classic. And I got really into like the John Byrne, Chris Claremont era of X-Men. So yeah, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Kitty Pryde, Storm in that era, like those are my easy choices right away. A lot of those X-Men classics that I had were like the Dark Phoenix saga, so I really got into that. What appealed to me about the X-Men was that X-Men 280, we're 280 issues into the X-Men, and by now there's X Factor and different series that are popping, and I opened up to 80 and there are all these characters. I have no idea who all these characters are, but they all do cool things and they all like know each other, and there's this drama. Like X-Men is really like a soap opera in a lot of ways.
For sure.
100%.
And that really pulled me into these comics. So also being able to just grab X-Men Classic and just get those really cheap, like $a quarter or something in a bin, I could read all these classic stories and really catch up on all of that. The other thing that I would say too is the Marvel Universe card, like collector cards.
Yes.
Were very foundational for me because you get all of the information, you get this flavor text, and you see all these characters, and it really armed me with this knowledge when I would see all these characters pop up in Infinity Gauntlet. So,
Right.
my easy answers are all the main from that era, because I really do love the John Byrne, Chris Claremont era, and like artists too were really driving me. So like John Romita Jr. and Paul Smith from that era. And then going into the 90s, I was a huge Jim Lee fan. And then even beyond that, going towards like Joe Madureira, where it was like kind of like pulling from all of this stuff where the X-Men, Jim Lee era X-Men influenced the Capcom games from a Japanese perspective. And then you had Joe Madureira pulling a lot of anime influence into the American comics, which was really fun for me. I love that era.
Yeah. So your final answer is Cyclops and Nightcrawler. Colossus.
Kitty Pryde, I have to put, if I mention Colossus from the era, I gotta mention Kitty Pryde. And Storm too. So those are my 5.
Which is interesting because you started off saying you were Psylocke.
Well, okay, so I was also going through puberty in the 90s.
Right.
I think Psylocke is a given.
Yes.
No, I understand where you're coming from there.
We all do, yes. Okay, interesting. All right, Justin, what's your 5?
I have to go with Gambit. Top of my list. Okay. I remember in college one year, a couple of friends and I went to, because I went to college in Staten Island, and so we'd go in for Halloween. We'd go to the Halloween parade in New York. My friend Logan went as.
Whoa.
Yeah. No.
My friend Wolverine went.
No, I think he actually went to Spider-Man because it's funny. Logan's favorite Marvel character was Spider-Man. And
that's funny.
His best friend Peter. Liked Wolverine.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Wow.
I was like, you guys are made for each other.
That's fantastic.
That is so cool.
But yeah, they did that, and I went as Gambit. Okay. So Gambit's top of my list. Colossus.
Okay.
I will also say Kitty Pryde, but not for the Colossus Kitty Pryde connection, more for the Lockheed Kitty Pryde connection. I love that little pseudo-dragon.
Cool. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, Havoc was on the X-Men for at least a little point at some time.
He was.
I just like the fact that he was basically Cyclops, but he had better control over his powers, and it came out of his chest. I was like, that's silly.
Yeah, that was cool.
And then Jubilee, surprisingly, Jubilee or Dazzler depends on what you're looking at them in, because I feel like Jubilee and Dazzler were almost the same kind of character.
Yeah,
but I like Jubilee because, again, going back to the cartoon, I got into X-Men with the cartoon, and she was right there off the bat. Like, she was the catalyst for almost everything in the beginning of the cartoon.
Okay.
Yeah. Do not remember what my first X-Men comic was. It was something in the 90s. It was probably something from Rob Liefeld.
Okay.
Which, yeah, I'm not a big fan of him or his
feet.
Or feet. Yeah, he's not a fan of feet.
He's not a fan of feet. Yeah.
I'm glad that came up. That's awesome. Rob Liefeld, I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast, does he?
He won't.
I doubt it.
Okay,
he won't.
Good, because I don't like him either. Yeah. But I do appreciate like these kind of crazy styles of the 90s. Looking back on it, you kind of laugh like, wow, that's so crazy.
My first exposure to X-Men was actually not even a comic book. I was in it was a comics and cards store, but it was mostly sports memorabilia. And they had those like not Marvel masterpieces. I did collect those, but that was way after. No, this was like might even have been the Marvel Universe's cards. And I saw a picture of Wolverine in the yellow and blue suit and was like, whoa, who is that? And I just needed to find out everything about him. So my first X-Men issue was the 90s series, the X-Men, I think it was 8. It had Ghost Rider on it, I think.
Yeah.
And Bishop, maybe. I think it was Ghost Rider and Gambit and Rogue were on the cover with also Ghost Rider, I think.
Yeah, I believe that story like takes place in New Orleans. Yeah, with Ghost Rider.
It was right before Executioner's Song crossover, which was so epic. That's when I started really buying comics, and like that's one of my favorites is Executioner's Song.
Yeah, and it was like I don't know, 12-part like crossover, and it jumps between each of the X books at the time.
Yes.
So you had X-Men and Uncanny X-Men and
X-Factor
and X-Force.
X-Force, yep.
And in order to collect the whole thing, you had to buy all of it.
Right.
I'm so smart at getting those.
For sure.
And the other thing too is I believe each of those issues like was polybagged with a little trading card.
Yes, it was.
It was like Strife, because like Strife was a villain.
Yes.
And he had like his strike files where it was like his like information on all of these characters.
Right.
They really were great at pulling you into this like web of all these characters.
Yeah, it was a great crossover. One of the best that they've ever done, for sure. So Wolverine is obviously my number one, forever and always. I was borderline obsessed with Wolverine. And then I'm going to go Rogue, Gambit, Kitty Pryde.
She made all of her lists. That's good.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go Psylocke. I think so. Not a lot of guys on my list. I always found the female characters more interesting. I mean,
that Kitty
aside
Pryde
from
is
Wolverine.
all of ours is telling too, because she was like you were saying, Justin, like how Jubilee was kind of like this insert character. Kitty Pryde was kind of like that before Jubilee. You know? And Jubilee was really more so that just for the cartoon. Yeah. And that kind of carried over into the comics after that. But like, Kitty Pryde was kind of like, you know, the fresh, the new face, and you kind of like had like the POV from her a lot of times, and she's grown so much over the series in so many different ways.
I mean, they've done so much with her, and like the big things are always the ones that stick in my mind, like when she phased the world killing bullet through the earth, and that Magneto was trying to do, and then just like she was gone, like she sacrificed herself to do that.
I remember that.
They pulled her back somehow at some point. I think Magneto actually pulled the whole thing back, which was insane.
One of the reasons why Kitty Pryde made my list is because she was Jewish, and that was like one of, because I was I'm also Jewish, so that was one of the things that really kind of struck out to me. You know, in like probably right around the time when I was really into X-Men, I was also getting bullied for being overweight and being Jewish, and wearing glasses and that whole thing. So it was like I really found a home with the X-Men because I was picked on because I was different, and so were they. So I really kind of self-identified on a more emotional level with it. But when I started reading, it was the newer series, and then I kind of dived into the older stuff, getting them at like my elementary school, we had occasional like swap meets for comic books, which was really cool, like a comic book show. So I remember going there and buying a bunch of comics and reading up, on same as you, Carlos. I was reading like the X-Men classics, where like the Brood was there, and I thought that whole scene was really trippy and really gross, and that kind of moved me into horror too, because I was getting into horror. So I thought that was really cool. But that was kind of one of the biggest reasons why I picked Kitty Pryde on my list, because otherwise, like, I don't think I'd pick her. I always thought she was a well-written character too. Chris Claremont was like an amazing writer.
That totally calls to the appeal of the X-Men, though. Like the X-Men were like the outcasts. And I mean, you can, there's like the kind of the minority analogy that, that I think they could pull from a lot. So I think the X-Men really struck a nerve in that way too. There's that issue where Dracula is in like attacking the X-Men, and actually Kitty Pryde has a great moment because she's got the Star of David, and he like grabs at her like to get her, and it burns his hand.
Oh, interesting.
And there's also another cool moment too where Wolverine like uses his claws to form the cross, but he's not a believer, so it doesn't work against Dracula. But then Nightcrawler is like, I'm a believer, and he uses it. And, it sounds really goofy, but that I really thought that issue was cool.
That's cool. Well, it looks like we are getting a call from our Patreon hotline, and it's been a while, so let's go ahead and pull that up. Janine, go ahead and forward that call over to us.
Again with the screeching. Blew a guy's eardrums out with all that high-pitched hullabaloo.
XVGM Radio, who is this and what can we play for you?
Hey guys, this is Rage Cage. It's kind of crazy to think how much has changed within almost a year's time, I mean, first time I called you, I was just like a fresh patron to your show, and now here I am, a host to my own podcast, VG Emporium, getting over 30 episodes in now. It's craziness. Crazy. And hey, I want to give you a big thank you for just being part of that inspiration. So now as to the reason why I'm calling in this time is that I heard tell that you're doing an episode on X-Men games, and, I want to request a track, and that is Psylocke's theme called Moon Knight from X-Men Children of the Atom, the Capcom fighting game. And my main reasoning for this is because it's just a really awesome track. And then partially because, this was one of my first, CPS2 Capcom fighting games, in that style of, Alpha and the Versus games. And, I was a little bit of a preteen then, and, seeing Psylocke kind of, gave me some feelings there. Some bouncy feelings there.
We were just talking about that.
Yes, we were.
That little bit of embarrassment aside, again, it's just a really awesome track. I think it's my favorite one of the entire OST, and I hope you guys really enjoy it as well. And, keep up the great work, guys.
All right. That one's by Shun Nishigaki, and let's go ahead and listen to it.
Welcome back to our X-Men flavored episode, starring Carlos from the Heroes 3 podcast, sub-starring Mike
Us.
and I. You just heard X-Men Children of the Atom, the arcade game from 1994. It was also ported to the Saturn 95, came out in DOS 97, PS1 98. That was Moon Knight. Psylocke's theme has nothing to do with Moon Knight, the character. This does not have a K in it. It's Moon, like night, Nick at night.
Right.
And it was composed by Shun Nishigaki.
Indeed. More Capcom goodness.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I was just playing this game the other day with my daughter, just kind of, screwing around on the Saturn. And I have the Japanese version of it. And, we were just playing, and it's a lot of fun. It's much more basic than, the later Marvel vs. Capcom and all that. It's a little harder to pull off, the air combos and stuff like that. But, it's fun. It looks great. Lots of, really deep colors, deep, dark, purples and, blues. Which
is something that I liked about a lot of the Marvel Capcom fighting games.
Yeah.
Something that they've always done, and they've done really well.
Mm-hmm. In this one, you can play as Storm, Cyclops, Wolverine, Omega Red, Sentinel, Iceman, Colossus, Psylocke, Silver Samurai, and Spiral.
As far as the X-Men characters go. Yeah.
Well, just in general. That's the entire cast.
Well,
yeah.
Akuma's in it, too.
Oh, I mean, yeah.
As a hidden character,
yes,
though.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's a secret character in this game.
Yes. Yep.
That was the first hint at a Marvel vs. Capcom.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I love this game with a passion. This was like what I said earlier. This was the moment where it's I couldn't believe this was a thing that exists. And like you were saying, Mike, it's like they didn't really solidify like the fighting engine. I think Marvel Superheroes has a more tight engine. There's still some crazy stuff in it, but you can do some insane stuff in this game. And I think it was really Capcom flexing after Street Fighter 2. Then we had like Darkstalkers, the vampire series, and they were really exercising their artistic chops. Like the animation got so much better. The characters' personalities really came through so much better in these games. And X-Men, you can tell there's a lot of passion behind these characters.
Absolutely.
You know, you mentioned like characters like Spiral, or characters you really wouldn't expect, even at the time, weren't at the top of the list for comic book characters.
Like really obscure character.
But
you know.
I mean, when you see Spiral, like her animation, they animate each of her arms individually.
Yeah.
And she has this kind of, she's on a tiptoe, like bouncing up and down.
Yeah.
It's amazing the animation that they put into this game. And you said you're playing it on their Saturn, and I'm just going to assume this had to be a RAM cart.
No.
Well, I mean, either way, I feel like
it still looked great. I had it on really, S-Video, and it looked great.
Yeah, really pushing the home consoles, like, you know.
The Saturn Capcom fighters really pushed the limit, especially with that RAM cart bump up. Really improved the animation, and it was pretty much like as close as you were going to get to arcade.
Yeah, I remember playing this on PS1, and I've also played it in the arcade. And I remember when I played it on the PS1, I was excited, and then slightly less excited because it just didn't quite feel the same.
No,
I mean, aside from like the buttons and joystick, it just didn't run quite the same on the PlayStation.
No, it definitely. A lot of these games, the Capcom fighters really struggled on the PS1. Darkstalkers 3, like. Yeah,
they had to like kind of add little things here and there to make up for the fact that it didn't look as good.
Yeah,
like Sentinel and X-Men Children of the Atom is like kind of an original Sentinel design that Capcom just kind of went with on their own without really getting approval from Marvel. But even that looks so iconic. And actually, if you see how like Sentinel looks in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, they actually really did dumb down his animation compared to how it looks in this game.
Yeah.
But I mean, that game also has like a gajillion characters, so I understand that.
Yeah, it's a fun game. There's not too much in regards to story or anything like that, but it's cool. It's cool.
Yeah, it's also definitely pulling from that 90s era of the X-Men. And what we mentioned earlier, a lot of the cast from the cartoon, they do the voices for the characters in the game.
That's right.
Yeah, I was going to say that, yeah.
That's a really exciting thing for fans that were really getting into the cartoon at the time.
Yeah.
The other thing, this isn't like really a plug because I don't know when this is going to come out, but there's this VGM cover band. Their name's Shrednobi, and they released like a Shinobi 3 cover album, and they're super good, and I love them a lot. And actually worked with them to do X-Men art for an EP that they're going to be released.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, I finished the artwork. I just don't know when that's going to come out, but it's 5 tracks. I believe it will be something like 5 tracks, and they're all X-Men Children of the Atom covers.
Oh, that's awesome.
One of them is Psylocke's theme, so I'm really excited. I'm going to be yelling that out at everybody when it comes out.
This song is very kind of frantic as compared to some of the other stuff. I get a vibe of like running on rooftops from this, where there's like a lot of like a lot of like highs and lows that I noticed.
You're pretty close too, because you're on the top of like a train, like kind of looks like a subway train, but you're out in the open.
Yes.
And it's a nighttime scene with the moon in the sky.
Yeah.
It looks really cool.
I love Psylocke's character beyond the fact that she's gorgeous. Yeah, okay, we get it. But like, she's super powerful. She's strong. She's got the psychic knife, which she could use. She always felt like a more appealing and interesting Jean Grey.
The focused totality of her psionic powers is like the quote they'd always use in the comics.
Yeah.
It was the 90s and people love ninjas, so they took a character that wasn't a ninja and did some magic, and now she's a ninja. So there we go.
She's got an interesting backstory. During this time in the 90s, they were really kind of ramping up her character. I mean, she kind of started off as an enemy, if I recall, in the X-Men comics, and then, kind of became a hero, joined the X-Men and all that jazz.
Yeah, it's a little complicated, but those are some of the beats.
Yeah. Not to dive too deep, but the point is that I always found her character fairly fascinating beyond just her looks. But like, I think it's really funny that all of us were like, yeah, we had a thing for Psylocke. Like, it's just kind of how it went, you know? And I think a lot of that has to do with Jim Lee's era writing those comics, because that was when they were doing the love triangle with Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Psylocke. So, you know, he was head over heels in love with Jean, but they had their problems, and then they kind of introduced Psylocke, you know, putting her in skimpy swimsuits and, you know, really making her like the pinup girl of the Jim Lee era.
Yeah.
And that whole part was like, it was just, I remember reading that part of the comic where like he's watching her get out of the pool, fixing her bathing suit and all that, and he's just like in the middle of talking like, and then like Jean just comes out of nowhere just like, are you even listening? Like one of those things. So it definitely was a moment for a lot of young, growing people.
That's hilarious. I love it.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. Shun Nishigaki started off with Captain Commando in 1991 doing and sound sub. I'm not sure what that means, but okay. Did Super Street Fighter 2 in 93. The Punisher game in 93. Also worked on Cadillacs and Dinosaurs in 93. Worked on the Mega Man 2, The Power Fighters in 96. Did the soundtrack for Resident Evil 2 and Dino Crisis. And then kind of disappeared after Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, which they were credited for the original
Right.
Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo. So, all right. Well, looks like we're going to get to my next pick, which is from a handheld game called X2 Wolverine's Revenge. This is based on the X-Men 2 movie.
Okay.
Sort of. It came out around that time in 2003 on the Game Boy Advance. This track is called Boss. I've been wanting to play this track forever on this show. And it's by Shinin, also known as Manfred Linsner. Welcome back, X fans. That was X2 Wolverine's Revenge. Came out on the Game Boy Advance in 2003. That was the boss theme, and that was by Manfred Linsner. It's credited for Shinen, but we already have talked about Manfred Linsner a ton, and it's obviously Manfred Linsner, so there you go. I love this game, this Game Boy Advance game. It's one of my favorite Game Boy Advance games. This came out right around the time when the movie came out, you know, kind of released around the same time. And it's a handheld version of the Big Brother version that came out on, you know, Xbox, PS2, GameCube. But the Game Boy Advance version is a side scroller, and it is very similar to the Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace game. Same dev team. It's Vicarious Visions. If you've played that, or if you've played, I think they did some other like licensed games, Rayman 2, The Great Escape, and Spider-Man. The combat system is very similar to like a handheld version of Devil May Cry, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Sounds cool to me.
It's really cool. You can extract your claws, or you can put them back in and you can just punch. I think if you extract your claws, you lose health if you start attacking, but then you can like pop your claws back in and like regain your health, if I recall. Or it might be you can pop your claws, you could fight. If your health goes down, you can pop your claws back in and you'll start healing.
Right.
So it's really well done. Most of the levels are just like pretty solid action, side-scrolling moments, but there's really cool like chase levels where you have to like chase Sabretooth but be stealthy about it. So you're like always, it's a real challenge because like you're always running behind Sabretooth trying to catch him, but you're not trying to actually catch him. You're just trying to stay away from him slightly, so like basically you're tailing him.
Yeah.
But because he's running super fast, you have to kind of, keep up with him. So it's a real challenge. I've beaten this game, I think, twice. But it's really fun. You can unlock different things in it. There's like a whole danger room element, if I recall, too. I'm getting it kind of confused with the big time game, the PS2 version or whatever, which I know you can like unlock comic book covers and stuff like that, which was always really cool. But this song is incredible. I mean, like, I remember the first time I heard it, it just woke me right up, because most of the soundtrack is very like twinkly, kind of like bong 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 bong, very like, it's got this vibe, like, I want to say like Mortal Kombat.
I could see that.
It's got like these various like Mortal Kombat 3, that level that it really reminds me of, like do 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 do.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of that. A lot of the music is very tonally similar to that. But then when you get to this boss fight, where you're fighting any of the bosses in this game, this is such a rocker. I mean, just like da 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 da. It's a sick riff, and then when those orchestral strings come in, it really brightens up the track and makes it less of a like nu metal kind of aggro track, and something a little bit more polished and a little bit more orchestral, which Manfred Lindner just knocks out of the park with this one, in my opinion. In my opinion, this is the best song on this soundtrack.
Fair.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
But the rest of it's good too.
I'm very interested in checking the game out. Yeah, and I did enjoy the track too. I also didn't get as much, maybe because there was so much going on in the track. I didn't hear that Game Boy compression, the Game Boy Advance compression that you're used to hearing.
This is using Manfred Lindner's like shin-end drivers, I guess this is really the only way you could put it. So he does a really phenomenal job of really utilizing the Game Boy Advance hardware to its fullest. His sound drivers sound really crystal clear and clean. So most of the Shin-en stuff that you'll hear is very similar to this. Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace is another game that has a great soundtrack, and that's also by Shin-en. So if you like this, you'll like that too.
Yeah, and it's funny, we're getting these Wolverine and Spider-Man connections.
Oh, yeah.
The two always went kind of hand in hand. I mean, this Spider-Man was always featured in X-Men books and vice versa, so. Well, it looks like we're getting a call on our caller request hotline, and I don't know if we should take this one, but Janine is really wanting us to take this, so I guess we will.
We'll do it. Janine, send that on over. XVGM Radio, who is this, and what can we play for you?
Come on, mon ami, you're going to talk about Gambit, but you're not going to play a Gambit song? What's the matter with you?
Well, that's a good point. We do have 3 songs left, so,
You're going to call Gambit a little bit of a break?
I don't know if you heard, but you are top of my list.
Oh, well, you're sweet.
Yes.
Yes, not the sweetest rogue, but...
No one's as sweet as Rogue.
All right, well, I'm going to pick a track from Spider-Man and the X-Men. Came out on the Super NES in 1992. This track is Gambit by Jeff Fallon and Tim Fallon.
Oh, the Dream Team.
Yeah.
Gambit, Jeff, and Tim.
All right, let's do it.
Welcome back. You were just listening to Gambit's theme from Spider-Man and the X-Men on the SNES that came out in 1992, composed by the legends Jeff Fallen and Tim Fallen.
I love this song so much.
Yeah, this was really good. This is a long track, actually.
It is. It's like 6 minutes long, yeah.
8, but yeah.
Oh, wow. Worth every penny.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. It didn't feel like 8 minutes.
No.
And it was really cool. Like, I love that groove. Just that bass groove that they get into. I mean, that's part of, for me, what made it feel like it went by quicker than it really did.
Yeah. I really like the organs on this. Like those like
really
shimmering
goes places.
Those shimmering organs, like wow, 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 in the background. Those are really cool. Like where the notes kind of hang and bend a little bit. That's
cool. In a similar way, not as bad as the Uncanny X-Men game on the NES, but I would say this isn't the best game, but I actually would come back to it a handful of times. I never owned it, but I'd rent it. And I like Spider-Man swinging in this game, which is kind of goofy, but it also has this situation like in the Genesis X-Men game where they basically plop you down in a big stage that's kind of a maze and you just have to find the exit.
Right.
But yeah, the soundtrack is really the star of this game, and this is like one of these moments where for me personally I'm like, how can this be coming out of a Super Nintendo? Like, I can't believe it. It's just mind-blowing. The Fallen Brothers are tippity top, and my preference really usually leans towards Japanese composers, but I can't hate, man. These guys are too good.
Yeah,
it's the best.
These two, along with like Matt Furness and Alberto Jose Gonzalez, are like 4 of the top like old school Western composers for sure. I have a lot of super nostalgia for this game. Yeah. Like, big time. Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, I get it. I mean, and when you talk about it, too, it's like, I think this first Gambit stage, are you literally being chased by a huge boulder or something?
Yeah, it's like a big spike ball.
Yeah, it's like, it's so weird. Like, okay, we get to use these X-Men characters. Have Storm, like, swimming the whole time or something, you know? It's like, what? Yeah, Do you get it?
I think that each level worked really well for what the character was used to, I think, in a lot of ways. Putting Storm in the water was a smart move just because, you know, her whole thing is she can control the elements. So putting her in a very claustrophobic thing because she has claustrophobia issues, it was interesting to kind of go through that because there are some really claustrophobic moments in that level. You know, where you're swimming around as Storm trying to get through these like paths and avoid getting hit.
Barriers. You have to like activate barriers and stuff.
Yeah. Gambit's level, you're being chased by a giant spike ball and you're just running around throwing cards to defeat enemies. Everything is like board game or card game oriented. Like there's pawns and knights and rooks and all that sort of thing, you know, as far as the enemies go. It's like on a chessboard.
Is this Arcade's Revenge?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
and that's the premise too, that Arcade, who's an X-Men villain, has captured all of these characters, and his whole thing is he likes to play games with everyone. So each stage is representative of a different type of game or kind of trap situation.
Right. Yeah, like Wolverine's level is circus based. Spider-Man's level is actually fairly normal. It's mostly just like the streets. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, he's a street level hero.
Right. But the plot is like Spider-Man's just kind of being Spider-Man, swinging around, and then he sees Gambit on the side of the street, and he's just like, "Hey, what's up, Gambit?" And then Gambit like gets swallowed up by this truck, this garbage truck, and he's like, "Whoa, I better go, be Spider-Man." So Spider-Man finds the X-Men and basically gets lured into, this whole thing with Arcade. It's a cool game. I really like it. I know that it's not the best game.
Yeah, this is an LJN game too, I think.
It is. It is. Yeah. But if you spend some time to figure it out, it's not too bad. The hardest part of the game, in my opinion, is the Wolverine levels. Honestly, the Juggernaut.
It's like the Juggernaut.
Chasing you. Yeah, the Juggernaut's chasing you, and you have to keep stabbing him like back, like while you're being chased. So you're constantly like moving left, stabbing, moving right, moving left, stabbing, moving right.
There's barriers. You have to claw your way through walls.
It's so difficult. But they time it so that when you get to the end of the level, there's a giant ball pit. And you cannot jump in the ball pit. You basically, if you get to the end of the level and you haven't defeated Juggernaut, you lose. Like he runs into you and then that's it. Or you can jump in
so
the ball
messed
pit to your death. Yeah.
It's so messed up.
So like as a kid, man, I really struggled with that level. I could do most of the other levels, but when I got to that level, it was definitely a challenge. But the rest of the game is fairly easy. I mean, if you spend some time with it. Cyclops' level is a lot of fun. Tim Fallon, we've covered him here and there, not that often, but started out with Vectron in 1985, Magic Johnson's Fast Break in 1990, and let's go his latest game, Lemmings, in 2017. Jeff Fallon started off with Psycho Pigs UXB in 1988, did the music for Wolverine on the NES. Latest game was Batman Forever in 1995. He did the music on that.
The SNES beat 'em up?
I believe.
Or the Genesis version?
Yeah, it's confusing because it's listed for DOS, Genesis, and SNES. But what's weird is that the music is listed for Tim Fallon in some sources, Jeff Fallon in others. Very strange.
Yeah, well, I think they had different soundtracks on the different releases, so Tim might have done some with Jeff doing the others. But yeah.
Oh, that's a possibility, yeah. That actually makes a lot of sense now that I think about it. It looks like he's credited for the Super NES version. The Genesis version was just done by Tim Fallon, according to this. Yeah. All right, let's get into your last pick.
Yes, so we've talked about X-Men Children of the Atom. We've talked about Marvel superheroes. So I'm going to wrap up my picks with X-Men versus Street Fighter. This is the arcade game that came out in 1996. And we've been talking a lot about the X-Men. I'm going to bring us over to the most famous enemy of the X-Men, Magneto. This is Magneto Stage, composed by Yuki Iwai and Yuko Takehara. All right, you're back. That was Magneto Stage from X-Men vs. Street Fighter, the 1996 arcade game composed by Yuki Iwai and Yuko Takehara.
I don't know about this one. I mean, I don't get a Magneto vibe from it.
How dare you?
It's not bad. I just don't get a Magneto vibe.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think that may just have something to do with the artist's interpretation there. I feel like what you would probably feel more has a more Magneto vibe is somebody, like a Western composer who is maybe, I don't know how familiar Yuki and Yuko are with the properties and whatnot, but I feel like Western composers tend to have a more down to the character interpretation of their kind of music. But I liked what they did with this one, because I mean, for one, it's a fighting game, so it's not like a beat 'em up or something where you're really focused on the music going on in the background. You're more focused on, putting in combos and beating the crap out of whoever's on the other side of the screen. And I think that this music really fits that kind of a play style. I also really enjoyed just kind of what they did here. Like, I heard a lot of, again, Mega Man X style guitars and stuff going on here, but I was surprised and pleased to hear things like the piano stuff that came in, and in the beginning and the middle, like they kind of broke down the timing with those triplets that were thrown in there.
For me, what I would say is that X-Men versus Street Fighter, here we have now finally these two properties being smushed together. With the Street Fighter characters in this game, they had their iconic themes that they would reprise, and they're arranged for this game. But when it comes to the X-Men characters, I mean, we'd only really had X-Men Children of the Atom to pull from, and they didn't really have like these iconic themes of these characters. They're more location based. So I think with this game they were really trying to make themes for the characters, but also in the vein of this very hyper action versus game, because X-Men versus Street Fighter, like, we're playing a tag team versus game where they can dash in and out crazily. The Street Fighter characters are all souped up, so they have like beams and huge fireballs. So I think they were really focused on how high energy this game was, and I think that's really informing the compositions. So I do agree, you don't picture Magneto, but you also, for me, you picture this kind of like dynamic energy. Like, Magneto as a character has always been a strong character. He can fly and he's got good projectiles, and any game that he's in, he's usually up at the top of the tier list, especially like when it comes to like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 or Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Yeah, I feel both sides of what you guys are bringing here, but I really like this track, and I really like the X-Men vs. Street Fighter soundtrack in general.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a great game too. The soundtrack, for me, the standout was Rogue's theme. I really like that. It's got like a saxophone in it, like a Capcom saxophone. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I think Cammy's theme is really cool too, and actually it's an original composition for this game, not reprising.
Oh, really?
Street Fighter 2
That's cool.
composition. Yeah, it's really good. And Rogue, yeah, since you mentioned Rogue, she was an addition exclusively for this game, and she would be part of the roster moving forward in the different Versus games. But the thing that was so cool about Rogue, having her in this Versus fighting game, is they actually gave her the ability to steal her opponent's powers.
Yeah, they made her Kirby.
Yeah, if you know Rogue, skin to skin contact will give her temporary abilities based on whoever she's touching, and like further contact could be fatal to the person that she's touching. But so she can throw a Hadouken in this game, she can shoot an optic blast, she can do a spinning pile driver. She gets Zangief's spinning pile driver, which is amazing. And even Akuma, she gets Akuma's Raging Demon, which is like so cool that they actually took the time to do that. And I mean, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is a game that has like so many characters, like I mentioned earlier, so they didn't really do that in that game. Basically, if she does her power drain to you, she'll get a buff, whether it be attack or speed or defense. So they kind of made that as a kind of a, to make up for not being able to animate 50 extra moves.
Yeah, so in this one, you can play as Cyclops, Gambit, Juggernaut, Magneto, Rogue, Sabretooth, Storm, and Wolverine. I really liked playing as Sabretooth in this one because back in like the 90s, he had this like sidekick character named Birdie. It was like this like blonde kind of bombshell kind of character. And she was always like she felt like almost like Mafia-esque. Like she would show up in a big car and like run you over, or like she would, at the end of the level, if you won, she would pull up in the car and she'd get out and she'd hand you a giant coat, like a trench coat, and he'd put it on and be like, "Thanks, Birdie." Like I thought that was a really cool touch.
Yeah, and Sabretooth, he's like one of the strongest characters in the game too.
Yeah, he don't sleep on Sabretooth in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 either. He's really fun to play as and really good. So, but this one does use the 4 megabyte RAM card if you play the Saturn version. Yeah, so super buttery smooth. Really cool. Yugo Takahara is the other composer that we didn't talk about last time. So, can you tell me a little bit about Yuko Takahara? I know we've talked about him before.
Yeah, of course. Yuko Takahara started out with Mighty Final Fight in 1993, and then, we talked about Yuki and the Mega Man X stuff. Yuko was also involved in Mega Man X, Mega Man 6, Final Fight 2, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in 1998, Marvel vs. Capcom, Clash of Superheroes in 1998 as well. It's a lot of the good fighting game things from Capcom. Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and then the Capcom Nintendo joint, The Legend of Zelda Link to the Past /Four Swords in 2002. Yeah. And then their most recent, or their final credit is for Mega Man 10 in 2010 as a music composer on that. Cool.
All right, I'm going to get into our last track. This is from X-Men Mutant Wars. I picked a lot of handheld stuff this time. This is on the Game Boy Color, came out in 2000, and this track is called Sewers, and it is by Double Dragon composer Kazuo Sawa.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see that, but that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think everyone's really going to like this one. That was our last pick of our extravaganza X-Men X-Spectacular.
Extreme!
There was an Extreme X-Men comic.
There
actually.
was.
Yeah. So this was from X-Men Mutant Wars, a Game Boy Color exclusive. This came out in 2000, and it was by Kazuo Sawa. I mentioned that this was very Double Dragon, and it is. It is entirely Double Dragon oriented because that's the composer, Kazuo Sawa.
Yeah, when the track started, we actually laughed. We're like, whoa.
Yeah. Yep. So the Kunio-kun series did a lot of the games on that. Worked on Tetris Plus, X-Men Mutant Wars here. Final game or latest game was River City Melee Battle Royale Special in 2017.
Man, you're really going to skip my favorite game, Super Dodgeball?
Oh, Super Dodgeball. I forgot. Yeah, you're a big fan of that one.
So, tell me then, outside of the composer, is this game reminiscent to Double Dragon in any way?
Yeah, it is like a single player, like action beat 'em up kind of thing. It's kind of difficult. You could change out characters at any point in time. You could play as 5 different characters: Wolverine, Storm, Cyclops, Iceman, and Gambit. So they believe that Magneto is controlling a band of cyborgs that are terrorizing the planet. So they're trying to defeat him. Yeah, so that's the game. There's also like a boss rush mode too, which is kind of cool. Yeah, you could change the characters at any point in time. It's fun. It's just also really difficult. So, yeah.
Yeah, looking at some of the screenshots, it definitely looks Double Dragon-esque. Like, looking at, like, going through the forest, like that. Not that it's ripped from Double Dragon, but that looks like a Double Dragon forest. The cityscape that's behind them in some of the other scenes when they're in the city looks like some of the Double Dragon city stuff. So, yeah, no, this is 100% like Double Dragon X-Men. That looks really cool.
Yeah, just to clarify, I misspoke. Kazunaka Yamane is the composer on Double Dragon 4. I thought it was Kazuo Sawa, but I guess I was wrong about that one. Also, Kazunaka Yamane did Double Dragon and Double Dragon 2 The Revenge, games like the Comba Tribes, Super Double Dragon, all that stuff. So he is actually the Double Dragon composer, just to clarify. But the thing is, Kunio-kun and Double Dragon are like two peas to a pod, you know what I mean? So, yeah. But yeah, it totally sounds Double Dragon.
It does,
ish.
yeah.
It's just that vibe. Technos was the name of the company, Technos Japan. There's a possibility that there may have been some holdover sort of stuff where, like, and that's the reason why they sound so similar together.
Yeah, I'm also really interested that this is like a year 2000 composition from Kazuo Sawa. Like you're thinking about the Nintendo era, and now we're getting way further down the line. And to do like a Western property game too, like it looks like there's a lot of stuff that I didn't realize was happening at that time.
Yeah, Activision was hiring like a lot of random developers to work on these like new Marvel properties that they had kind of acquired fairly recently, like right around the time of when Capcom's run kind of ran out. So Activision snatched up pretty much all the rights to almost every single Marvel property. And then, of course, after Activision, it was Sega, and Sega kind of ruined a lot of stuff. But yeah, Activision was just cranking out Marvel games, and the Game Boy Color was definitely one that, had a lot of Marvel properties. Blade had a Game Boy Color game. X-Men Mutant Academy had a Game Boy Color port that was also on the PS1. There were 2 sequels to that. There was X-Men Mutant Academy 2, which came out on the PS1, and then shortly after that, there was a GameCube game called X-Men Next Dimension, came out during that era.
And was that also like a type of fighting game? Because those Mutant Academy games are fighting games?
Yeah. The Next Dimension is the 3rd game in the series.
Oh,
and
nice.
I remember getting that when it came out and like loved it. Like I thought it was great. A lot of fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I have seen, like, I remember playing it back in the day, and I mean, I was a Capcom head, so I was like, this is some other stuff.
Yeah, it's cool. It's
really
nowhere near as good as the Capcom games for sure, but like it's still pretty fun.
I did see a tweet that kind of went viral recently that was a clip from one of those Mutant Academy games, and it's like a combo, but you can play as Professor X. But he's like doing physical attacks in his wheelchair.
In his wheelchair, that's amazing.
Like spinning like a tornado.
Yeah,
with his
yeah.
wheelchair. It's pretty funny.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
You would think, I mean, he could control stuff using his mind. Why can't he just control his wheelchair to like fight people?
That X-Men issue 280 that I told you was my first issue, I was looking at it, and at the time Xavier actually could walk, but that issue he actually like breaks his back again, so it like resets it so he can't walk again.
Yeah.
Which is a comic book writing convenience.
It's really, I mean, like we were talking about like X-Men kind of bringing recognition to diversity, and handicapped people kind of get thrown under the bus, like, everywhere. And so it was always really cool to see like, a handicapped person have like such power. I mean, he's the leader. You know what I mean?
He's like literally one of the strongest minds in the Marvel universe.
Right, exactly. So it's cool. It's definitely one of the things that always really drew me to X-Men.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, now is the time when we talk about our favorite picks of the episode, which is going to be really tough because there was so much good stuff here. But we're going to let our guest go first. Carlos, what's your favorite pick?
I'm going to have to go with Rage Cage's Psylocke theme from X-Men Children of the Atom. That's always been a banger for me. And hearing it again, still super great. Even in a playlist full of a bunch of great tracks. If I had to pick a second place, I think it would be Konami X-Men, Here Come the Heroes.
Yes. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Justin?
Fair. I think I'd have to go with the Gambit track from Spider-Man and the X-Men. It was a long track that didn't feel long, and like I said, I got lost in that bass groove, and it was just really moving for me. And then I think I agree with Carlos as far as my runner-up there. Here Comes the Hero was really good.
There's just so much I love about this episode, musically and just in general, but man, I'm going to go with your Gambit track. That's top of my list for sure.
Oh, Spider-Man.
The Carlos's Gambit track. Yeah, it's so
Top
good.
tier right there, man.
Yeah, but I was also really surprised by that Wolverine track from Marvel Superheroes. That was really good too. I feel like X-Men the arcade is like, it's so good. It's like whatever. Like it's got to be. It's like the Tom Brady of like it's great and amazing, and nobody's gonna pick it because everybody picks it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, one of those things. But thanks so much for being on this episode. We had a blast, and we definitely got to have you back on to cover more X-Men, and even beyond that. I mean, Marvel properties, it's nice to talk to a fellow comic reader. I think that we could totally explore even more stuff. I mean, like we said, we didn't even touch on really the Activision fighting games. So,
right.
it's a place to start.
I mean, this was super fun. I love all of this stuff, and I could just talk about it for a long time. We did end up with an anniversary extra double size issue of a podcast episode, basically.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
Where can we find you on the web? You mentioned your podcast earlier, but if you can drop any links or any info, we'd love to know what you're going to be up to.
Sure. So yeah, Heroes 3 podcast can be found on all the social medias. It's usually Heroes, the number 3 podcast. I have a personal Twitter. I guess I'm on Discord a lot, so you'll see me creeping around on Discord.
Yeah, you're on our Discord.
Yeah, for sure. And on Twitter, I have my own Twitter handle, which is Pooplos_Z. And if you'd like to know what the reasoning behind that, I'd be happy to tell you. But hit me up. Happy to talk about all of this fun stuff, and happy to be part of this video game music community. And I'm super glad that you guys thought of me to bring me on for this.
Of course.
Yeah, no, it was great having you on. This was a blast, and we definitely need to find some time to, like we said, either dive into some of the later X-Men stuff or even expand it to more Marvel general, because this was a blast, and I think there is a lot more to be had.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I totally agree. Let's do it.
Part 2 coming soon.
So, we'd like to take a moment to thank our Patreon patrons, without whom this show's continued improvement would be impossible. They are Alex Messenger, Cam Worma, Chris Hart, Jordan and Anson Davis, Rage Cage, Kung Fu Carlito of the Heroes 3 podcast, Scott McElhone, Chris Myers, Brad Austin, Chris Murray, Llama Adam, Marcus Stewart, Scott Brackett, Nick Davis, and Ryan McPherson.
If you would like to become a patron, you can sign up at patreon.com/XVGM Radio. There you can see the different tiers as well. Just $1 gets you a thank you and access to our monthly live shows.
You can visit our website, xvgmradio.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and learn more about your hosts, as well as any of our guests or composers that we've had on the show.
If you'd like to reach out to us, you can always email us at xvgmradio@gmail.com.
If you like what you've heard, please consider giving us a review on iTunes.
You can join our Facebook group and chat with other VGM lovers at www.facebook.com/groups/XVGM Radio, where we talk about everything from current game news to sharing awesome VGM tracks or just talking about the podcast itself.
You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle on both those sites is @XVGM Radio.
If you don't have any other social media or just want to try something unique, check us out on our Discord group chat. Links in the show notes. Justin, we're coming back in a month. And what month is that?
That is the month of Spooktober.
All right. What's happening on Spooktober?
It's Spooky Fest 2022.
Yeah, man. I'm stoked for this. I've already got a couple picks rolling around in my skull.
I even feel like that last track from Mutant Wars could fit in with
Oh, yeah.
spooky stuff.
That's fair.
Yeah, I totally feel that.
Yeah. So if you are a patron, you know, there will be the Backstage Pass. The month of October is when we do our Spooky Fest Backstage Pass, so you'll get a few extra spooky tracks.
That's right.
But otherwise, if you are not a patron, you can expect 11 spook-packed... Is that a phrase? Spooky packed? Yeah,
Spooky snack packs.
Spooky snack-packed tracks.
Yes, exactly that. I'm excited.
Me
Oh
too.
man, I love Halloween. I'm so excited for that.
Yeah, it's gonna
Yeah,
be a
it's
good
the
time.
best.
For sure. All right. Well, we're out of here. We're going to go read some X-Men comics. This is Mike
And Justin.
signing off for XVGM Radio. Because most of the soundtrack is very like twinkly, kind of like bong, 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 bong. Very like, you know, you're in the woods, it's
Mr.
winter
Sandman?
time, you're in Canada.
That's what it sounded like.
Bong, 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 bong. Mr. Wolverine. Yeah. Mr. Logan. No. And what month is that?
That is the month of October. I was trying to be clever.
The
I
month
failed.
of stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the month of Spooktober. That's what I should have said. It's the month of Spooktober.
Oh, yeah. You really dropped the ball there.
No, I'm going to edit this, and that's what I'm going to say.
Nah.
It's the month of Spooktober.
All right.